Africans at home and throughout the diaspora. Unity is strength. We got the power.
Stop the fussing and the fighting. Now's the time to do the right thing.
We need more UNITY. Come.
Stop the fussing and the fighting. Yeah. Now's the time to do the right thing.
In the spirit of Umoja, embrace with love.
Let's do it right now.
Yes, to embrace with love. I mean, sometimes we forget that, but it's hard. I'm telling you, y'all, it's hard to love in these times. And Dr. King's birthday is coming up, and you know he's nonviolent and love your enemy and all of that, but damn, I need some help on that. This is Jamala Rogers, your host of Voices from the Battlefield, and this is the show that connects all of the issues, or attempts to connect all the issues that are happening in the world around us. You know, and there's many folks that are on different battlefronts, battlefields, and we try to bring them here because sometimes we think we're the only ones that are dealing with a particular issue. Then we get to see that other folks are dealing with the same issue. So we connected all the issues around racial injustice, economic injustice, and the fight for democracy. So I'm going to start off much like I did. You know, we got a new year, and that's important that we see it as new and fresh. And again, we just entered the new year. And last year, if you believe in the Chinese calendar, it was the year of the snake. And that means we shed all of that old stuff, old ideas, old baggage, old, ways of thinking. And now it is the year of the horse. So we are literally going to go galloping into this new year, full of hope, full of promise, full of organized approaches to this struggle of ours. And so I am especially almost giddy about this one because now going forward, the first Wednesday of every month is going to be the Black Commentator time. And we're going to talk a little bit about that some more. Here's what my reminder is, and most of you already know. One is that genocide is still going on in Gaza. It actually is worse now, you all, because it's wintertime there. And if you've seen the images of Gaza, you know there's pretty much nothing but rubble. So where are those people supposed to seek shelter? So it is cruel, and it's still going on. And even though there's lots of other things that have, some foolishness that has taken place, those people are still struggling for self-determination, for their very lives. The other thing I always need to remind you of is that we have a 34-count felon in the White House. He's a war criminal. Until we see all of the Epstein files, we can at least say that he is a protector of pedophiles. And so we have probably the most incompetent and corrupt government that we've seen in modern times, and you all can speak to that in a minute. But we have some challenges ahead of us, and there's no need for us to be fearful, to be backing down, to be timid, but we do have to be intentional, and we do have to be bodacious. So without further ado, the other thing I want to say is on January 1, people in Missouri got an increase in their minimum wage. And don't think for a second that had anything to do with the state thinking, oh, it's time to give people a raise. No. That was the results of organizers, particularly around labor, who collected all them damn signatures, who got it on the ballot. And so now we have not only an increase to $15 from $13.25 or something, we also have paid sick leave, y'all, so that the families in Missouri got a little bump based on all the crazy stuff that's happening with the economy. So again, that was the result of people organizing for that. That was not the legislators say, oh, let's give the poor families in Missouri a break. No. In fact, they were opposing it all along the way. So when you get that little uptick in your check, know that it came from people like the Organization for Black Struggle, Missouri Jobs with Justice, Missouri Worker Center, all the unions here, SEIU, and many others. They helped to make that possible for you. So here we go, y'all. We have together, and we were just talking about before we went on air that how this should have happened a long time ago because we've been all writing for blackcommentator.com for a while. And all of us pretty much have websites. We have podcasts that we do, but we never kind of came together for this. So last year I started putting it out there, but I wasn't specific. I said I want to do something new in 2026, and I didn't tell people what because I didn't know if it was possible myself. Not that you all wouldn't be committed, but I know that you all are some of the busiest people on the planet, and so getting you all in together for one space, even for 1 hour, was going to be a undertaking. So here we are, unbelievable, but we are here. So we have some issues that we wanted to discuss. Mainly how we just, had the fifth anniversary of the January 6th insurrection, the attack on the Capitol. People saw all the images once again that they saw 5 years ago. But what we wanted to do was tackle what is the country like since then, since MAGA came into power, and particularly what has been the impact on Black folks. And so we're going to get to that in a minute. But before we even had finalized those questions, there was the invasion of Venezuela. And so that has completely consumed the news. And it's sad what's happening. But I think, and what I'm hearing from folks, working class people, is a anticipation of something worse happening in this country. Because this man has been able to get away with a whole bunch of stuff. Almost every day he's done something. Some of it is distraction, but some of it is about wielding power and enriching himself and his family. So we need to be, we can't possibly keep it up with all of it. But people are feeling anxious that something, if he got away with that, then what else can we expect here? And what are we going to do about it? Because it seems like he is unstoppable. And I heard somebody use that very term on as a commentator, that he is unstoppable now because the checks and balances that we thought were in place, the courts, the legislature, they're pretty much impotent. So what will stop him? So first of all, I just want to, what is your take on Venezuela and what's going to happen in the future? I know a lot of our listeners may not know the differences between all the leaders in Venezuela, Maduro from anybody else. And so really, how can we break through and say what is really going on here for the U.S. and how is it going to impact us here? And Reverend, you can start.
Well, all right then here. Well, to my panelists and to you, Happy New Year, no matter how you take that. But what I thought of immediately is here's a guy that is really about world domination. When we look at Project 2025, there wasn't anything that he was hiding. If anything, they have executed about 75% of that proposal. This is where I'm at about all of this. He's horrible. There's no, argument about that. But I think that what we have to look at is the people who capitulate and who are complicit in it. And so even though I'm the beneficiary of the civil rights movement, it was a very difficult time. They were lynching Black people. They were killing people, King, Medgar Evers, Malcolm X, I mean, all of that. But the one thing that was moving forward and being more inclusive about people's right is the Supreme Court. So at this point, the Supreme Court has really become Trump's enabler. And so my point is that when you look for hope, you have to, it's sort of like grace. It can't be cheap. It has to be done in a way in which we can say we have some ducks, lined up that can help evoke hope. And one of the things that I even see here, is that even when I look back at the 60s or whatever, we don't even hear protest songs. We don't see protest art, not in the visible way in which we have, was quite palpable. So I don't want to take up everyone's time, but that's just where I am for right now.
Bill, what do you say? What do you think? You're looking pretty reflective.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the program. I don't think Trump is unstoppable. I think that what we've seen is that there has been various blockages that have been put in his way. that they have either blunted him or this forced him to go around them. And were it not for the Supreme Court, building on what Irene was saying, there would be greater blocks on him. Resistance continues to grow. The attack on Venezuela, interestingly, has the support of only a third of the population, which corresponds to basically the number of people who are supporting a fascist movement. So basically, the other 2/3 either adamantly oppose or are not sure. This, as a commentator was pointing out the other night, is very unusual because usually when the U.S. attacks somewhere, regardless of whether it's legitimate or not, there's majority support, at least in the beginning. It ain't happening this time. If they go forward and attack Greenland, for example, they run right smack into the question of the future of NATO and what will Europe do, and Europe and Canada. And it's not clear to me how that could play out. It could play out in some very ugly ways. The attack on Venezuela was about several different things. It was about oil. It was about Trump's vision of an Orwellian world where there are three blocks: Oceania, East Asia, and Eurasia. And for Trump, it would be Oceania, which would be the Western Hemisphere and Western Europe. He's prepared to concede much of Europe and parts of Central Asia to Russia. And then maybe, depending on whether the Chinese play games with them, they'll concede China and parts of Asia. Africa will remain an area of contestation. And I mean, that's the world that he believes needs to be brought into existence. And, I think for African Americans, one thing we have to be very clear on is that there is a full-blown campaign of ethnic cleansing that's underway. The polite term that the European fascists invented a few years ago is remigration, in order to drive out alleged migrants. And then you combine that with the attack on the 14th Amendment, and they basically want to restore the white republic as an apartheid state. That's where we are. And if we can't sit back, that's just simply, what defeat is not an option.
So I think I don't believe he's unstoppable either. And I was especially encouraged when I saw a little bit different from the poll that you saw, and it was a mainstream poll that happened, that the people who opposed the invasion was up to 94%. And it was almost comparable to the question of who do you think should be running the affairs in Venezuela, the Venezuela people, and 94% said yes, the Venezuela people. So to me, when I say encouraging, that to me is the result of the work that some of us have been doing for a long time in terms of the education about foreign policy, about, what the U.S. is doing here and how it gets exported other places. But that was the results of some real world work here about what our government is capable of doing. David, what's your take on all of this, on Venezuela?
Yeah, Venezuela. The first thing that came to mind when I saw this image of Maduro hauled into the court in New York, I was thinking, here you have Netanyahu, a fully grown war criminal, charges, and yet we can't get justice in terms of what has been happening with Palestine. But you have these trumped up charges. You have a foreign leader hauled into a U.S. court. And it really shows you, I think, the state of where we are right now. In some ways, I feel as if Trump and the MAGA movement are trying to reach back into the 18th and 19th century. Um, I think in some ways they're trying to return to the days of the gringo, the days of the Yankee, Uncle Sam, as Bill had mentioned, with this control over the Western Hemisphere. Um, and I also see what's happening in Venezuela and, our antics in other parts of the world really tied to what's happening here at home, because you have oppression at home, rising fascism. We're witnessing our rights, our civil liberties being eroded. And then at the same time, we're also enacting violence overseas. It's one big mess. And I think I am hopeful that what is happening now is unpopular. What we're doing with Venezuela is unpopular. 20, 30 years ago, you would have had a majority of people down for this. But then we have to ask the question, if there is so much opposition to this policy, why haven't we stopped Trump? And he's doing one thing after another. He's getting away with it. Yeah, you see instances where the courts are stopping him or whatever, but still he's getting away with this. And ultimately, I think the problem is that white folks, white men have never had consequences in this country. They can do whatever they want. They have gotten away with whatever they wanted to do. And that's what we're seeing now. Ultimately, I think white people are going to have to decide that they've had enough. And perhaps once they start suffering more, maybe we'll see some changes. But I see Venezuela tied to, some of the domestic issues that we're going to talk about, in terms of white folks in this country doing what they want and never having any accountability.
And I was thinking the same thing as I looked at all of the things that were happening. It did feel like we were in a time warp going back, and this whole notion about well, it wasn't Trump, it was one of his other mega monsters, was saying, we own the Northern Hemisphere. And I'm like, what? Who said that? I mean, it's just a whole disregard for sovereign nations. But when we look at the sovereign nations inside of the U.S. and how they've been disrespected, then you can't help but know that that's going to happen elsewhere. So I think for me, the central question is, why does he keep getting away with it, and what else can we do differently? And I know some of us are involved in different coalition efforts to do that. But I think and maybe for a few minutes, I thought that most people in this country were positive with all this shenanigans, that somebody else would stop it, not them. That's why they had elected, congressman, a person. But now we see that they're not going to do anything. And I think it's been really hard for people to say, well, how can I, this person who works at, putting widgets on a plane, how am I going to do something? And I think that's the crucial part that folks like us have to really give some direction about. But I think for me, and for what we were trying to center this particular radio show about, is what is the damage that has been done, particularly affecting Black folks, and how are we going to address that? Because I think it's been really hard, even for me, and believe me, I've been scouring the internet to see if there's one place where we could see all of the policies that have been done, and all the dismantling that's been done, and it's impossible. I mean, it's just, like I said, even if you dealt with one thing, there's also sub things under that are cascading, that's impacting us that people don't know about. And I think the really sad part is that a lot of our citizens don't know how the government works. They don't know the pieces of government. They don't know the functions of government agencies. They don't know the powers. And so when you say this happened, they don't know what that means for them. And so I wanted us to wrap our heads around that best we can and talk about what we think, because all of us are in different areas of the country. Like what are we seeing where we are? And one of the things that I think came up for at least a couple of you all is what's happening with Black folks in particular, the dismantling and the criminalization of DEI. And Bill, you talked about the ethnic cleansing part of that. We saw the attack on the National African American Museum, forcing them to like change some stuff inside. I mean, it's really just some bodacious stuff. So I'm gonna let you take the first crack at that. What's happened that is erasing Black folks' culture, image, power, and all of that? What particular policy, so that people know? Because at the end of the day, we have to then say how much have we lost and how are we going to get it back, if ever. So I think, you need to know what our task is going to be going forward, because, okay, we can't bring back the West Wing of the White House. That's gone. Okay. And then some of the other stuff, like people are saying we can never recoup, but we have to know the damage that's been done so we know where to start our fight. So Bill, take a crack at that.
So I want to start with this, Jamala. I think that the biggest problem is that Black folks have lost our belief in collective action. And we have fallen into high levels of despair combined with strange forms of individualism / entrepreneurialism. The idea that I can do well if I go into business for myself. I need to build my own brand. Whether I'm an activist, a poet, or whatever, I need to build my own brand. And that the idea of collective action is old school. And so I think is a result of despair and a result of the failure to deal with the slow drip. We've been in a car for the last 50 years that, you go out in the morning and you look under the car and it might be like a little drip. You say, well, it's not too bad. You keep driving around and there's that drip, right? And then all of a sudden your car breaks down on the road because you've lost your transmission. We've lost our transmission. We've been watching that damn drip all the time, thinking that it's really not that serious, that eventually we'll get around to correcting it. And we haven't. I think that the erasure that we're witnessing, I'll tell you, so you began with what you said earlier. I was going to say, you want to stop Trump? We got to stop having weekend demonstrations. We want to stop Trump. The demonstrations need to be Monday through Friday, right? They need to be in the streets. But this idea that we have these weekend demonstrations, no matter how big they are, Trump doesn't give a damn. Trump is concerned about what's going to happen in the elections in the fall, assuming the elections happen. And he's also going to be concerned about the way we mobilize or don't in the streets. And so I think that, as with any other thing, the time has come now not to trash what we've done, but to escalate pressure.
I totally agree. And I know, David, one of your things was also, you see, and this is white supremacy's last stand. And when I look at the rest of the world and the fact that white supremacy and the extremist right have really taken over even some governments, and the whole anti-immigrant, anti-Black is alive and well, not just in this country, but other places as well. What do you think needs to be done, and how do you see it manifested where you are? And that's in Philly, home of the 1976 whatever.
Yes, well, in Philly as and elsewhere, I am happy to see lots of efforts in terms of people fighting back, fighting against ICE, against all of these policies, and we need more of that. I would agree with Bill that we can't have these weekend events, these protests that lead to nothing. Ultimately, I believe we're going to need something, some sort of, you know, mass mobilization, uh, national strike, something dramatic, something substantial. Um, I am not necessarily surprised by what is happening and the extent of the damage. I think what does surprise me is the pace, the speed at which it's happening. And I do think that this is white supremacy's last stand. This is the white man's last stand. Um, in some ways, I think it's an extinction burst. They know that this is their last chance to do this, despite the demographics. They have to get this done because this is their window of opportunity. Um, and yet, although I think this is going to pass, we have to be mindful of the threat. And this is serious business. I mean, the reason why they're trying to erase history, the reason why they're, engaging in all these book bans, books of LGBTQ folks and trans people and Black folks, is because they want to make sure that the children do not grow up with knowledge of the history of this country, because if you know what has happened, then have to you want to do something to change things if you know the problem. And authoritarian regimes, they don't like history, they don't like critical thinking. And I think, yes, they are trying to take things away, but then we also have to realize that they don't have the power, and we have to decide that they don't have the power. And this whole thing with black capitalism and pulling one's pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps, that's not going to do it. The Black Panthers knew that you needed, um, you know, in terms of the free breakfast program, things like that. We're going to have to, band together, come up with the systems, the structures, the policies that are going to help us.
I totally agree. And before Reverend Irene, I do want to say that I think it is a human trait to isolate when you feel threatened. And so to Bill's point about people like withdrawing, I'm going to take care, what I hear all the time, I'm going to take care of me and mine, F this other stuff. Well, unfortunately, you're not in a vacuum. And the capitalists have made this a global economy. So even with something that's happening in China or whatever, it's affecting you here in St. Louis. And so again, I think that the normal thing is to retreat for safety reasons. And it's up to us to then say, that's going to make it worse for us if we don't come out. And the coming out doesn't mean that we just come out for the feel good. It's like we're going to target some people. We're going to go to some people's houses, some of these congressional people's houses. We're going to go to their places of worship, their places. We're going to make it uncomfortable for them like they're making it for us. And so I agree that there needs to be a whole different set of tactics, but people need to be unified around a strategy. One of the things you did, Rev, is you said you had a particular piece around the attacks on Black folks, and you targeted the voting rights and what that means. And I think it's even more significant going into the 2026 midterms. So what do you think needs to be done around voting, the whole safeguard, American voter eligibility, the SAVE Act? What is that all about? For me, when I see policies for Black people that have expiration dates. I just don't even want to be bothered with that. We got to fight for something more than what's on paper. So how are we going to maximize voting rights going into the 2026 elections so that there is in fact a meaningful change of power in the Congress?
The interesting thing is that we don't have to reinvent the wheel to do this because we can just take a playbook out of the civil rights movement. We know it's not like we don't know how to do it. The problem that I'm seeing is that we haven't given in this new generation in a way in which we operate within our individual silos that have been mentioned here. How do we get people out of their individual silos to understand the importance of that? Because we've seen it, Freedom Summer. Folks went down in these areas in the South, but now you can go in urban areas too, where you have a whole group of disenfranchised groups of people here. And what we're seeing more and more since the passing of the Civil Rights of the Voting Rights Act in 1965, it's a shell of itself. We see the gerrymandering that is going on. We see the ways in which people who have been incarcerated, particularly Black men, cannot vote here. Voting has always been an issue for not us, but the way white people understand Black power is for us to understand that Black power. And I think that, and we have to understand the importance of not only voting, but also Black dollars here. And I always say one of the ways in which we have lost gradually lost that sort of what I call Black entrepreneurship. We're seeing inklings of it, but in a very isolated way and stuff. Is that the way in which, in my opinion, the way in which integration was intentionally rolled out, that we lost dollars. When I was teaching, I used to say, folks, to my students, look, Black people used to own gas stations. They would say to me, get out of here. And I'd be like, no, it's not just beauty parlors and barbershops, we own hotels here, So again, it's not that we don't know what to do. I wonder how much we bought into the notion of if we integrate, we'll be a much better society. And we don't mean integrate at this point. We're talking about being intersectional. I always say to folks that when, Robin DiAngelo wrote this seminal text here called White Fragility. And in my way, we're seeing it at its best. Long before she wrote that seminal text, we were saying the browning of America. Did we Black people think, okay, this is going to be an easy transition? No, we didn't. But there are ways in which I feel very hopeful and we can galvanize. We saw a moment that was organic. 2020, unfortunately, the public lynching of George Floyd. We were in lockdown. Literally, all of our lives were in, because we didn't understand this invisible virus. We didn't have a cocktail. I saw people who were intergenerational, all types of intersectional issues came out on that issue. The question it raises for me, how did we lose that fervor? And that's where, to me, if we deconstruct the way in which policing came about at that time and we didn't push back enough, or the way in which the rhetoric about the virus scared us so much that we went back in our homes, I think that we can use that moment as a teaching moment, because at that point, people didn't care about their lives. They were and white folks, how about that? White folks were outraged. And so how do we grab that moment? And there's certainly ways in which we can pull from that moment, and certainly from the playbook of the civil rights movement.
So if you are just joining us, I'm Jamala Rogers, your host with Voices in the Battlefield, and this is the first episode of BC Roundtable, which involves, and these are not the only folks, it's a whole gaggle of us, like radical writers, but what we all have in common is that we write for or on the editorial board for blackcommentator.com. What we don't have in common today is the weather, because in Massachusetts it is snowing, and in St. Louis it is 60 degrees. So yeah, we got some things going on. But one of the things that was my area of concern is the dismantling or the elimination of the oversight committees. So many people don't know that there are what's called these inspector generals who are responsible for oversight, for having audits, for holding the various agencies accountable. One of the first things that Food Must did under Doge is completely just wipe them out. So I think it was about 18 IGs that were wiped out. Some of those were, and they were in different agencies. So, for example, there was one for HUD, there was one for EPA, one for FDA, Food and Drug Administration. So, for example, what that would mean for Food and Drug Administration is that there's not going to be as many people there to say, oh, we should flag this particular drug or this particular food because it's harmful. There's now nobody to do that. And so people should know that there's nobody inside that's watching out for them. And I think that's very compelling. Even in terms of energy, some of the stuff that had been fought for by environmentalists over the last 40, 50 years, even since the 70s, when some of those, the EPA was established, a lot of that stuff has just been dismantled and it's gone. So there's going to be some assumptions going forward about, there's a law that says you can't do that. Well, as we've seen, this man is a lawbreaker. He don't give a damn about the law. And in fact, it was against the law for him to actually fire the IGs. And we see where that's gotten us. So I really want people to be aware that inside, and this is, I think it's serious business for the CDC, the Health and Human Services, which communicable diseases are under that, because that was a tried and true agency that we relied on, not just for pandemic information, but for all other kinds of health and welfare kinds of things. And that agency has pretty much been drained of its institutional memory and expertise. And so I don't even tell people, I can't even trust it anymore, really. So again, some of the things that have been established as norms, that financial banking, I might not have it all right, the financial banking thing that Elizabeth Warren helped to set up, gone. So again, those watchdogs that knew these areas better than us and would help us to understand it when things were going awry, that has all been dismantled. So just know that as we continue our conversation. So one of the things that were in both of you all's responses was this whole notion of what MAGA is doing to create chaos and maybe even civil war. So Bill, that was one of your issues. Talk about what that could look like. I had pretty much last year this time, I said, this is what's going to happen. And I talked about us moving closer towards civil war, where we would be pitted against one another, all for the notion of creating chaos where they get to do whatever they want to do while we involved in these silly things like, I don't think you should get trans health care. That's a law that got passed here. Trans people can't get health care. Kids can't get health care. So we're fighting those fights, and they're significant for sure. But the bigger thing they are taking, and we don't really know about. So let's talk about what this country is going to look like in 2026, because I think these people are going to get desperate. This is to David's point. When they see that the escalation of opposition is growing and growing in ways that they hadn't anticipated, and now we're going to have international support for what's going on here, what could that look like going into 2026? And also talk about whether or not you think Trump is going to leave after 2028, because many people don't think he will. So Bill, talk about civil war and how can we minimize the differences that we have so we can concentrate on the big stuff.
So think about that metaphor I used before about the car that's dripping transmission fluid. That's what's been happening for a long time. And part of that has also been a change in rhetoric, political rhetoric, that you really start to see after the collapse of the Cold War and in the United States. And you start to see as early as the 92 presidential campaign and the rhetoric of the candidates, the Republican candidates, and Ross Perot, that basically is in no way conceding any ground to bipartisanship, but is suggesting that a sort of warlike stance needs to be taken by Republicans. This escalates in '94 with Newt Gingrich and the contract with America. So there's been this change. Then you have the '95 terrorist bombing in Oklahoma City and the discovery of all these right-wing militias. It reminded me of the scene from Casablanca where the guy, where Claude Rains says, "Oh, there's gambling in the house," right? Well, we all knew that these guys were operating, and they're very well armed. Not shotguns, 22s, but RPGs, 50 caliber machine guns, stuff like that. And they've developed this whole, the far right has developed this whole ideology of a race war, boogaloo, they call it, and they want to incite things. Now, January 6th, 2021 could have been that full-blown eruption. But what the far right understood after 2021, when they were not sufficiently repressed, which is what should have happened, that part of what they needed to do was to change history. And so we've been seeing this slowly, and it came to a head yesterday with Trump and company describing January 6th in a way that none of us would recognize it. You would almost think that it was a picnic that just sort of got out of control. So part of the preparation is to change who is the enemy, who is inciting violence, and who is not. And so you got that. What happens later this year is going to depend to a great extent on the willingness of anti-MAGA forces to really display audacity. Because I do believe that Trump will do whatever he can to sway the election. One of the little things, which I was thinking about today, is you may be familiar with this whole thing with the stamping the envelopes, that they decided they're going to change how mail is stamped. So instead of it being stamped when you go to the post office, unless you request a stamp, right, it will not be stamped until it goes through the system, which means that someone doing mail-in voting might mail something, let's say the day before the election, and it doesn't get stamped until 2 days later, in which case it's considered null and void. So we're going to see a lot of these shenanigans. One of the things I would say, Jamal, this means is that there needs to be grassroots organizing. So our organization, the organization you and I are participating in, Standing for Democracy, and setting up organizing committees. There need to be organizing committees all around the country. And one of the things that they need to be doing is thinking about election protection, making sure that people can vote, that they're safe, making sure that election officials are not intimidated, that if there are efforts to intimidate them, that we block them. And I will say block them. And I'm not going to say how, but we basically block any efforts to intimidate election officials and voters. That's the situation. What happens beyond that, I'm far from certain.
David, what are your thoughts about civil war or civil unrest domestically as we move into the 2026 elections?
Well, I think Bill had some very poignant things to say, and I can't help but think that although a lot of this is brand new, we've also been there before, as Reverend Irene said. We have done these, we have fought these battles before, and I think about what Bill was talking about in terms of how the right is trying to reshape, refashion this narrative of January 6th. And I can't help but think about the Civil War and how the Confederates, they turned themselves into the Klan, and they came up with this lost cause rhetoric. And I think that in many ways we're seeing the same thing now. And I think about times in history where uh, the white racists engaged in these insurrections. I think about Wilmington, North Carolina, 1898, where there was the local government, fusion government of black and white lawmakers, and the Klan came in and killed everybody and replaced the lawmakers with themselves. We have to look at what was done then, what lessons were learned back then, and I think tailor our response looking at what happened and try to come up with new solutions. But I think it's gonna be a tough year. But at the same time, I'm also hopeful, because although we see so much being torn up, so much being destroyed, I'm not mourning, because the system, the way it was designed, in no way is benefiting us. And what we have to do now is fight for a new system that we want, that is actually going to respond to our needs.
And I think that's a good point, David, because I'm thinking too that they're seeing this as an opportunity for regime change. We should be doing likewise. Like, what does it mean for us to come out of this, not just maintaining, but reimagining what could be and actually organizing for that. And so I do think it's going to be a tough year. I think things are going to get worse before they get better. And so that's why I've been telling people that's the reality. Again, that doesn't mean that we get fearful and sit down. It means that we need to be creative about what tactics that we use. So, Reverend Irene, I'm thinking about, you are a person of faith. And when I say faith, I mean, we all are in some ways, but part of some kind of, church community, religious community. What exactly are you all telling people, as Black clergy? Because I'm thinking like what I'm seeing in St. Louis, and people have verified that it's happened in other places, Black churches are being shuttered. I mean, since COVID, really they've taken a hit. And so, people are not going to church. Sometimes it means that it's more convenient to stay at home and do the Zoom. But more than that, I think people are saying the church is not meeting my needs. I need some kind of understanding about the world that I'm living in. And I know it's not just about live your life and after you die, things are going to be happy. So what is the message that the clergy is telling the faithful flocks that are coming on Sunday, the few that's coming, or through Zoom, however they're listening to them?
You want to know what's the word?
Word.
What's the word? Okay. Well, one of the words, and it's so interesting because both Bill and David had mentioned this in terms of the rhetoric here. And one of the things I say to sort of to iterate what they have said is that where the North has won the war, the South has won the narrative. And so part of changing mindset is that you got to change the narrative. And we're in a moment of fake news. Truth is not truth. Yet, so how do you do that? And then the whole idea, people have been sort of like, I can't believe these Christian nationalists, and people don't understand the politics of what that term means. It's an identity, meaning some are churchgoers, but not necessary. There's a geography to it, meaning most of them in the South and Midwest. There's an ideology behind it and stuff. So what the point is that as we get folks to come out and vote, I mean, because we want them to do that. We want people to galvanize. We need the word. We need a new word. We have to fashion a different narrative. And what has always hurt my heart a lot is that you have a lot of progressive ministers, who allow the religious vitriol to take the shape that it did by virtue of being silent. We hear, I know this is a controversial minister, but he spoke the truth. Jeremiah Wright, if you remember him. We need more of that kind of, people putting together the history of Black America. Because we got to understand, who changed the narrative and people got upset was a 1619 project. That's a radical shift. Okay, because if we say America starts at 1620 up here with these pilgrims, then what? Who are these black people coming in 1619 here? And so we got to understand we should control the narrative. Listen, what have we done? 250 years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, what, 60 years of separate and unequal? We know how to bring the word. The point is that we got to fashion that under a cohesive body. And when we do the word, I got to say this, we got to be Pan-African. Not to evoke my brother, W.E.D. Du Bois, but this Venezuelan thing, we think it's just South America, but see, people don't understand the geopolitics. Trinidad and Tobago is the closest. I mean, of in terms of not a butt to it, but in terms of closest to it. We're talking about different black countries here. So we need a Pan-African movement, because will those countries comply or capitulate because they don't have the military might here? So we need a Pan-African message.
No doubt. And I know David and Bill would agree with that, because I see it in their writings all the time. And let's not forget Cuba, because many people think the Venezuela attack is all about getting to Cuba, because Marco Rubio has such a hatred for Cuba since his parents left that place. And he's got his own personal vendetta against Cuba. So I think we just have to watch out for that. But when we look at most of those Caribbean countries, they don't have military. I think about what happened to Grenada during the New Jewel movement. They went right in there and just, took over. And that little place is like, what? What? You all were intimidated by that? So really this whole notion about taking over the Northern Hemisphere could be a reality, unless we do have a Pan-African point of view. It has been a joy to talk with you, to see you all. And I'm telling my listeners, you may not see these same faces, because there's two other sets of folks who write for blackcommentary.com, but we all have in common that we are trying to educate and inspire our people through our writings. Again, all of us have websites that you can go to, and podcasts. And so that's why I didn't do a whole lot of introduction, because that would have taken up the whole hour to introduce these people and what all they've done. But I do want to let people know that come tomorrow, the Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression is having their monthly meeting, and this time it's going to be virtual. This meeting is important because it's all about local control of the St. Louis Police Department and the power grab that took a 20-year struggle by the people of St. Louis to own and control their own police department. That was taken back by the MAGA legislature back here in May. That struggle is going to continue. We're not giving up without a fight. Most of you all know that I am one of the plaintiffs in the lawsuit against the state. We have a court hearing next month in Jefferson City. We're going to be having a bus, the whole thing. We have a legal dream team that's composed of Art City Defenders, the local radicals here. And we also have attorneys from the Advancement Project. So I really do have a dream team, and it's all about the people. And so that meeting is going to explain the merits of that lawsuit, but also the outreach that we need to do to pack the courtroom. So that's tomorrow, 6:00. On my website, you'll see a way to register for that. But there's going to be a whole lot going on around Venezuela. I can see that. In fact, just before this show, there was a press conference by Black organizations around the Venezuela, and people were giving statements. So I'm hoping that they are doing what we had suggested, Reverend, that is make it a Pan-Africanist view, because folks look like us down there. That's what folks understand, whether it be Costa Rica, Venezuela, Grenada, all of those folks look like us, because that's where the slave trade took people. And so those are our people, and we got to be connected to that. Thank you all again. If you missed this, it's live streaming now, but after today, it will be on my website, at least the audio part, and the video part will be up on my YouTube channel. So you don't miss anything, and you can always go back and listen if you want to hear some of the wisdom of these people. Any last words, folks? Any words of inspiration or wisdom that you all have, real quick? Because again, this is going to be a hell of a year, y'all. So how do we insulate our people? How do we motivate our people that first of all, we gotta be present. We gotta stand strong. We gotta stand tall. What else do we need to know?
If last year was the year of the snake, as you said, and we got the snake in the White House, and this year is the year of the horse, we're going to gallop over the snake and we're going to gallop to victory.
All right, I like that. I'm gonna use that. What about you, Red?
I say this, that when we think about the preamble of the Constitution, when they say we the people, okay? We the people.
Right.
Don't forget that.
David?
Malcolm X said that we are not outnumbered, we are out-organized. And I think ultimately it's organization and mobilization that will get us through this. Not to go back to the way things were, but to go to a future that we want and need.
All right. So, Marla Rogers, your host on the battlefield, and I just messed up the music.
Africans at home, peace with love.
But yeah, we know that we got a lot of work to do. We need to do it in community. We need to do it as organized as we possibly can, and we need to do it with vision and imagination. This is Jamala Rogers, your host of Voices from the Battlefield, and I will see you on the battlefield. Thank you for listening.